This is a podcast from comedianscomedian.com.
This is the Comedian's Comedian podcast. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Stuart Goldsmith, and this is the final podcast that I recorded live at the Montreal Just for Laughs Comedy Festival in the week just gone. This is Andy Kindler, an absolute force to be reckoned with in American comedy. He is in the unique position of being almost the voice of the comedy industry's conscience. He gets to be the comedian in the room full of comedians. I don't know if there's anyone who's ever been more appropriate to the title of this show. We're going to refer in this show to the Hack's Handbook, and I'll give you a web address. You can find that. Someone is kindly hosting that online, so I'll give you that in the body of the show. That is really something to be enjoyed, so we'll get to that in just a moment. But this, the very last episode from the four that I've released in one great big weekly chunk from Montreal, this is the brilliant Andy Kindler. Let's get stuck in. Andy, thank you so much. We're here at the Montreal Just for Laughs Festival, where yesterday you performed your annual State of the Industry address.
And I'm on Cloud 9 now. I don't know why. What do I open? Week opener, Cloud 9. Oh, Mr. Comedy opens with Cloud 9. Yeah, I was never more nerve-wracked, nervous than this year, and it could not, from my end, have gone better.
And what is it? Just describe what the State of the Industry address is to people listening in the UK who maybe haven't heard of it. I mean, it's an incredibly unusual thing. It's a truly unique.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is, because I've been coming to. It's always, my wife says, please don't tell everybody how old you are and exactly, and show a ticking clock on your stomach as you're marching towards death. But I first came to this festival in 93, and I didn't come in 94, and I came back in 95, and I'd written an article for National Lampoon called The Hack's Handbook.
Yes.
Which was like a how to be a hack comic.
I'm familiar with it. We'll talk about it. It's incredible, and I'll direct people to it, but I want that to be its own section, so we'll come back to that because it's fantastic.
Cool. And then in 95 that went well, and so then Bruce Hills, the head of the festival, said, why don't you try another speech? And then it was my manager who came up with, Bruce Smith, who came up with the idea of State of the Industry. And it was just a perfect name. So we just didn't know what it was going to be. We were just like, what has happened during the year? It's kind of stuck to the same format, and it was like and just became year after year, and now it's 19 years.
And it occupies, I think, a really valuable position, because I think in an industry where we all like to convince ourselves that we're speaking truth to power, it's very easy for comedians to end up feeling like actually we're the powerful gang, we're the insiders. So to have one of us kind of turn a mirror on it and go, you're the court jester at the court of jesters almost. Do you know what I mean?
I know, and in no way has it ever been a comfortable thing. It's always been it brings up all of my own issues as a person, because it's like I have not so many different sides, two sides to me. But one side is like gets angry about things. And, currently I'm angry about the whole anti-Muslim thing. And so and then that hopefully sparks comedy. But then the other side of me is I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want people not to like me. I'm not. I wish sometimes I could do it and not care what happens. Yeah. But then maybe the fact that I care what happens molds the speech in a good way.
Absolutely part of it, because it's a very privileged position almost. It's a kind of it's a position of kind of power. Do you feel powerful doing it?
I don't. Well, I think I would probably never think of the word powerful, because I say one of my targets are people who use power.
Absolutely.
So and I'm also short, so I would never think I'm powerful. But it's more like it's how you get that feeling when you're people are laughing and it's for the right reasons, and you feel that energy start to swirl around, and that's what it was just one of these weeks where I couldn't have asked for it to go better. There was an article about me in the New York Times on Thursday. Okay. And it was written by Jason Zinnemann. And one word that he used, which I had known the word before but never really thought about, was that he calls me an ombudsman.
Yes.
And I felt
okay.
that word really does fit what I'm doing.
You're the person that people can take their complaints about comedy to.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
That's great.
So-
You're kind of a monitor. You kind of monitor the situation, and you're the one that can say, because I think we all know comedians who are happy to heckle other comedians.
Right.
And that always seems to be about trying to draw attention to them.
Yes.
But this is the very nature of your very specific persona and personality and relationship to the industry. Like someone like Louis C.K. couldn't do the job that you're doing.
Yeah, but I also the other part of it is that not that many comics want to do what I'm doing, and it started for very personal reasons. It started for I hate to say angry, but whatever, bitter. The joke would be bitter or envious or jealous. These emotions like why. It's not so much to the level. If you're a thinking person, it's not like you really are stuck with the why does he have it and I don't have it.
Sure.
But there is that part of it all.
Absolutely.
So it started with me, the Hacks Handbook started, but also when Leno got the job over Letterman and all those types of things, I started to slam these, but wasn't thinking about the ombudsman part of it.
Yes.
I never thought about it until Jason brought it up. But those were like individual, and then I was always, I loved the idea of bad comedy and I liked making fun of it.
Yes. And do you, there's almost, is there a kind of a code within comedy that we don't make fun of each other?
That's the code that, I've always, without naming names because there's no reason why I need to get other people more upset, but when it's been really bad over the years, it's been when comedians have turned on me, not the ones I'm talking about.
Sure.
But the ones who are upset that I'm talking about other people.
Because what in their mind you've sort of broken the code.
That's what they literally believe it that way. But my argument was always, so you can do a million jokes about Michael Jackson or you can do a million jokes about this, but other popular culture figures are off limits because they're comedians. And it seemed hypocritical to me.
Yes.
The other side of it that's always been accepted has been the roast side of it.
Yes.
Which is how, and that almost always does come from, the cliche would be they love each other so. In the good old roast days, before they started roasting like Justin Bieber and stuff like that.
Yes.
But in the old Friars roast, they did know each other, and so there was this permission to go nuts.
Yes.
But it wasn't. That's not quite what I'm. It's not what I'm doing.
No.
Sometimes it is.
Yes. Okay. There's lots of different elements to it.
Yeah.
I suppose you're. Are you angry with the idea of? And you've mentioned anger a few times, and we're only 5 minutes in, Andy. Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. But do you think that comedians should be special? Do you think that comedians should regard themselves as special? Because I think a lot of us do. A lot of us are like, it's almost like because we've paid the price of I was scared and I got on stage anyway.
Yes,
people sort of feel like, now that I've paid my fear price, so now I'm one of the guys that's allowed to say anything. And I find myself thinking, no, you're just another person who kind of could be bothered to get on stage.
Yeah, that's
Do you know what I mean?
That's true.
It doesn't. Yeah, in some ways, comedy is sacred, and in other ways, it really isn't.
Right, and the thing is, I think the thing that you're bringing up is that if you call comedy an art form, then people are going to be like, you always feel weird about doing it.
Yeah,
but that's more, I think, a convention of how we tend to look at life philosophically, and I don't want to call myself a guru, but I'm really into I've always been into Eastern philosophy type things when I was younger, especially. And that whole thing, like Zen Buddhism, the whole thing is that everything is an art form. And that's why I kind of believe every single thing can be an art form. So comedy should be an art form. Art is an art form. Painting is an art form. And so when you approach it that way, then everything is sacred, but the problem is that if you go too far on the sacred thing, then you start to feel like you're. I don't want to be the guy who's giving the word or the Messiah of comedy.
Okay. So
I'm sorry, I'm less articulate than I claim.
No, that's quite all right. Yeah, I think you're fairly articulate. So
fairly, I will go with that.
How did it go? How did yesterday's State of the Industry address go compared to previous ones? Do you feel like you nailed it? Do you feel like you know what you're doing now?
Well, there's two issues. I nailed it. I absolutely, and I will always say I'm the first person to know when I bombed. Not only was the first person to know when I bombed, but the first person to think they're bombing when they're maybe not bombing that well.
Yeah.
Much, because I've seen it with other comics. In general, we have a tendency to I do, and some other comics over-exaggerate how poorly we're doing.
Yes.
Yes. And to me, it became part of a shtick. But sometimes, say if someone's strength is their weakness, there may be a night you see me where, all right, now you've said something terrible about yourself after every joke. Back it off a little bit. But so I know when I've done badly. But the other part of it is there's no way. It's like, and this is also like I think a philosophical thing is if I told you tomorrow every set you did on stage you will always kill for the rest of your life. You would sound good, but it's not really kind of.
Right.
It's like you need those down. So
it's like winning the lottery, sort of. It's like
if you want,
we love the idea of it, but actually it would just take away all the triumph.
Right. Although I'm still willing to give it a shot to the lottery.
Yeah.
I'll give it a shot. But so there's no way if I said to you I've got it wired now.
Yes.
That would be incorrect. But that being said, I do know the technique. The technique from doing it for 19 years has helped me. So
it
helped me lay the foundation for yesterday because I know if I get too much into reading quotes, if I get too much, into minutia.
Sure.
And so I was able to pull out of things like, okay, I'm not going to read 8 pages of Adam Sandler's thing.
Yes.
And then it was one of these things where it all just came together yesterday and it was such pure joy. Because this year was the worst year. I mean, I hate to keep harping on it. I sound like someone who's won't let it go. But my dad died in January. I talked about it in the speech yesterday. And it kind of like threw my whole year even to more of a tizzy than it normally would be. It was like just... And people told me about this, that you mourn in weird ways. And so I was mourning like getting angry all the time.
Yeah.
And specifically, I have a lot of problems focusing in life. And that hit me so hard. So I did not finish a speech till 9 o'clock in the morning.
Really? That morning? Oh my God.
I printed it out. And my wife was just great because, someone has to stop me. She goes, you have to go to sleep. It's it. It's over. And so I did. So like even that thing that I printed out, which is the final thing, if I go back over that, I'm sure there's like, it's not like written like from good afternoon all the way through.
Sure.
And, I still have so many organizational things to learn. But the other problem of it is, you just don't. In the old days, when I first started the speech, I could every year do a certain structure that would work because everybody was familiar with the sitcoms that were coming out.
Yes, okay.
So it was like the festival would meet. The festival was much cheesier back then.
Okay. And we've still got we've retained the music.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that cheesy little Montreal riff.
This didn't happen in the street. To me, that's like you have walked down the street and seen crazy things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So this is the place for it.
Yeah.
What my problem was in the 90s was these kind of acts were in comedy clubs.
Yes, I see. Yeah.
So this is actually delightful to me.
Yes.
Those crazy big heads that are good.
Sure.
So, but in the old days, everyone came here for a sitcom deal, and because I wrote the Hack Handbook, the 90s were a bad time for comedy, except for when friends of mine, we all started the alternative movement.
Yes.
And that's changed everything because a lot of monologists got squeezed out. But the festival was still very mainstream.
A lot of who got squeezed out?
A lot of just what you would call monologists.
What does that mean?
I mean, like just
I love it. What does it mean?
It means like people aren't juggling or it's just them and their words.
Oh, I see. As in monologists. I understand. Sorry, it was an accent thing. As in people who do monologues.
I thought I was like, well, they don't know this word over there.
I'm so sorry.
You know how the English don't have
I thought you were saying minologists. So I would consider monologists.
It's a small monologist.
Yeah, I see. So they were getting squeezed out because of the variety style acts in the clubs.
Right, because there were more clubs than you could sustain good acts, and so terrible acts were in clubs because club owners didn't know what they were booking in those days.
Okay.
And it was just like, oh, this guy's crowd pleasing.
Sure.
So everybody, and there were also really, really like more of the heads of the networks came then.
Yes.
So I could make fun of these people, and they kind of enjoyed that. That's less happening now.
Okay.
Because and it's a good thing ultimately, because now the festival, to me, is actually celebrating, having fun, and that kind of thing, as opposed to being looking for a deal. But there's less things that everyone's aware of now.
I understand. There's far more channels. There's people lower down in the food chain coming to the event, sort of production-wise, and also, there's so many more shows. You can't guarantee that everyone's seeing the same thing.
Even in the old days, even when everyone was aware of it, if I got too much into. Like, I would watch these shows, and something would make me laugh, and I would quote the dialogue from it.
Yes.
And sometimes that worked.
Yes.
But when I went too far, I used to, in the old days, get Variety and Hollywood Reporter. I would read it every day, and I come up, and then that became a diminishing returns, because, first of all, it worked maybe one year, but then it didn't work another year. So even when you're talking about even in those days, people didn't know everything I was talking about. But now, I just talked about, I think, one sitcom was the Comedians yesterday.
Yes.
So, and then that was more like about Billy Crystal. But there's a whole bunch of other things I could have brought in. I just decided not to.
And how much of when you were individually riffing about Billy Crystal or Seinfeld or whatever the things are that you're presenting as things that have angered you, how much is that completely a real anger, and how much of it is a little tiny bit of anger that you have contrived, that you've whipped up for kind of comic effect?
I think I would like to say that it's not contrived. That the only time that it's maybe contrived is as a joke.
Yes.
Like, I'm not really that mad at this
Sure.
thing. And that's why the years that there's been a lot of, say, quote, controversy, or like I said yesterday when I talked about Anthony Cumia and I had to hide in the bunker, that was really uncomfortable, because that was like, I was not just talking about, ultimately, I kind of do this. If you said, do you despise Leno? I think I kind of do despise Leno, but I'm not worried about him punching me out, and I'm not worried about him, like committing genocide. You know what I mean?
So this is Andy. What an incredibly lovely man, and what oh God, he's so, you absolutely must watch his act. Anyone with an ounce of appreciation for comedy will just love how unformulaic it is. They'll love the persona, the performance of it, the fact that he's constantly railing against the audience for not understanding it. You get to see absolutely a performer completely live in the moment of the performance. It couldn't be further from him reading out a script. It really couldn't. It's so good. So have a little look on Google for that if you can. Have a look on YouTube. Also, here's a link. I'll tell you a link for the Hacks Handbook. It's Nathan Smart has kindly hosted it. He's I don't know who Nathan is. He appears to be a graphic designer, but he's hosting it. And so the web address you want is nathansmart.com/akh8.pdf, as in Andy Kindler Hacks Handbook. nathansmart.com/akh8.pdf. It's only 3 pages, so it's not like you're I don't think you can actually buy it for real, so I don't think we're ripping Andy off by directing you there. Have a look at that. You won't regret it, and it's astonishing to think he wrote it in the early 90s. I think in 1991 he wrote it for National Lampoon. And you will see for yourself just how many of those comedy formulae and structures and tricks are being used today. Listen, if you spot something in there that you do, you don't need to kill yourself, but just be aware that, maybe, I haven't looked at it in too much detail, and probably that's from fear that something I do will be in there. But it's absolutely worth checking out. It's very, very amusingly written as well. It's not just him kind of... I've taken down the new hack site that we used to have at comedianscomedian.com, because it started to get a bit personal, and I felt we drifted from the original point of it, which is a sort of a tongue-in-cheek look at all the daft stuff that we can routinely, all the traps we can fall into, if you like. It started to get a little bit personal. This isn't personal, and come on, it's from 20, 30 years ago anyway, but really, really good fun to see a bit of a swipe at comedy. And loads of Andy's State of the Industry addresses are available on YouTube. So that's Andy Kindler. Another half of the interview coming up short. I just wanted to take a moment to say, as ever, thank you so much for all your donations. If you'd like to donate to the show, you can do that at comedianscomedian.com, where you can also click on the individual episodes and get taken to the individual page for that episode and continue the discussion on Facebook underneath it. Or you can join the Facebook group. If you search Facebook for the Comedians Comedian podcast, you can join a group. We've got about 2,500 people on that now. And that's the sort of place where I try ideas out on you and get votes on merch ideas and give you extra little tidbits and secret content occasionally, things like that, photos and what have you. So you can join that. You can follow me at ComComPod on Twitter, or you can email me info@comedianscomedian.com. But if you do enjoy the show, if it makes a difference to your life, to your working practice, if it makes a difference to your day as you're reclining in the bath, marathon training, or walking one of your many, many animals, then please support the show. You can click on the PayPal button, or you can support us via Patreon. There's a link there on the donate section of the website. You can donate at patreon.com/ComComPod. You need to register with Patreon first. If that's a thing you're into, then you're a very bleeding edge, web savvy internet kid in a way that I'm not. But that's the current structure we've got for subscription payments. I'm going to look into that more after Edinburgh. But you can make a one-off donation of £5, £10, £20 or whatever you think is appropriate. 50p a show, a couple of bucks a show, whatever you like. You can donate that via PayPal by following that link. And I will be enormously grateful. Your donations make all the difference and they really help me to keep this show to keep it moving, really, to use all the time researching and prepping for it, to pay the people that help me out with graphics and internet and music, and to pay for the hosting and all that kind of stuff, to buy decent equipment so it sounds good, and to basically help me sink as much of my time into this project as I do. So that's how that works. If you're enjoying it, feel free to donate at comedianscomedian.com. I hope you've enjoyed these episodes from Montreal. I certainly have. Let's get on with the final section of this final one before we go back to a slightly more normal week next week. Now back to Andy Kindler.
Let's talk about the origins of you as a stand-up. How long had you been doing stand-up before you wrote the Hacks Handbook?
Well, I started in '84. And don't do that. Brian Poseidon's walking by, and he's giving me the face.
Hello, Brian Poseidon. I mean, that really was a perfect moment for him to walk past.
And that is the roast. What he just did. That is the roast part.
Yes, yeah. I don't know if that will show up on the tape, but Brian walked past and he did an impression of you going, "I started in '84."
Yeah, so that's the part of like, because I've often, like, I'm friends, I always say, because I love Zach Galifianakis, so it always sounds like I'm name dropping, but like I make fun of Zach Galifianakis, I make fun of him when we're together because we really love each other, but I'll call him the thinking man's Pauly Shore, and I'll say, would you say your career is more cashing in or selling out? How would you? And then he'll viciously attack me, but it's all really from love, because one of the things I talked about was Adam Sandler, and one time because Zach got in trouble years ago for saying something about Adam Sandler, and he's like, well, we make fun of each other. Zach said to me, I said, yeah, but Zach, we know we really like each other, so we wouldn't get upset. Whereas he knows that we're making statements that we really believe.
Yeah,
you know. So I started in '84, and I was in a duo. I went on my own in '86. I started to go on the road in '87, and I wrote the Hacks Handbook in '91.
Okay, so you had a good lot of experience of those sorts of things.
Yes.
Now, there is, regular listeners to this show will know that on the old website, I think we've taken it down now, but we did for a while, we crowdsourced a thing called New Hack, which was trying to identify contemporary tropes of stand-up hacking.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so it really made me laugh when I saw the Hacks Handbook, because the formulae that you describe in that handbook are as used and as relevant today as they were in 1991. There are so many things, like, you know, the ethnicity sort of jokes where they go, it's thing X plus thing Y, which means that I... Exactly. So those are all absolutely still there. We were identifying things like, I don't know if this... I don't know if I read all of the handbook, but I noticed someone last night, in fact, who shall remain nameless, doing a deliberately bad mime and then stepping out of it and going, I don't know what this is. Do you know what I mean? So I was on the phone, looked at hand. I don't know what this is. Yeah. What's that supposed to be? You know what I mean? There's so many of those things. It's sort of fun to identify them, and it's kind of fun to kind of. It's a nervous, giggly kind of fun as a comic, because you go, "Oh God, do I do any of those? Have any of those slipped through them?" So, which hack makes you? Which hack formula makes you grind your teeth the most?
Well, I've for a long time talked about which is not in the handbook, but there's a variety of things like you just said. What you just said, I would call the planned mistake. Mm-hmm. Like
fake mistakes, we call them in the UK. Yeah.
Oh, so I went out, it was really, really cold, so I came in, I put my coat on a hooker. Did I say hooker?
Yeah.
Because if I did say hooker, I have 8 minutes prepared. And then it was like I used to do the comic who the joke just occurred to them. Oh, here's another bit I've been doing for 15 years that I'm going to make. Or the comic whose own material cracks him up. I can't help it, folks.
Oh, I've seen a lot of that.
Material just... And that trick that you're saying is like, it's so interesting because it comes from something really great when it first started.
Yes.
Say Letterman, Carson, all these people deconstructing their own comedy. And then when it becomes hack, it's almost scary because you're using something that was clever, and now you're like, turning it into
Yes, and there's a weird sense, I suppose, in the life of a young comic. You see, as soon as you see 2 or 3 people doing the same formula, I think part of you almost legitimately thinks, oh, this is what we do. This is how it's done.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And almost that sentiment of this is how it's done, that's the opposite of creativity, isn't it? That's the enemy of creating anything new. That's not what the people who first came up with that were thinking.
Right, but now there's always 2 issues, because the first issue is it just youth? And sometimes it could be just youth where you learn it. Like for me, I didn't do like, I didn't think of like, oh, that guy's saying something like, are you performing, get your feet off the stage. I never did like stock lines or anything. But what I did think was the audience knew the audience was right when I first started. It took me a few years to realize the audience is not always right, and many times, depending on the circuit you're on, they're always wrong.
Tell me more about that. That's fascinating.
Well, in other words, like, but more, see, because a lot of things are different. It's like when you were saying that you still see that some of those same things happening. I don't see that as much happening. Like right now, I think is a real renaissance in comedy where there's more different comedy than there's ever been. It's like here there is. I don't know what it's like when you're a kid.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's less of those tropes, and there's different tropes. So
then there are tropes of alternative comedy. Yeah.
Right. So like for a while, everybody was saying retard for some reason, which I never really quite. It was almost like they were saying, "Yeah, I say it."
Okay,
you know, and then a lot of it, was like homeless people.
Yes.
Were would be this butt of jokes. All of a sudden, everyone is like, that's an easy group to make fun of.
Yes, because it almost like we're so used to the idea that you don't make fun of them that now there's a frisson of something else works in the joke of like, yeah, I said it.
Or my big pet peeve is fat jokes.
Okay.
You know, it's like Letterman, who's like in many ways my hero. He happens to do fat jokes, but it's like I can't expect every comic, you know, that I love to have the same. But to him, I don't think he ever thought about it other than just the comedy part of it. You know, it comes from some part of. But for other people, I think it's like when they're actually consciously thinking of it, it's the type of comedy where I'm constantly looking for the group I can bash.
Yes.
And so then it may be unconscious completely, but it becomes like one of the things with the Seinfeld thing is he doesn't want to accept that 10 years from now, you're just not going to be able to do jokes about how swishy guys are. You know what I mean? It's like now that doesn't mean you can't joke about whatever, but you can't just be the gay French king. It's not going to be.
Yes, just a bit of context for people in the audience, people listening to this who might not understand the gay French king reference.
Yeah.
That was a specific joke that Seinfeld told.
That's about. The one. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go on. In your words, you explained.
Yeah, well, but basically, what he was one of the things that triggered his whole tirade, which was that things are too PC. One of them was that he said they were asking about colleges, but he hadn't played colleges, but he heard they're bad. And the other one was that he had done this joke, and you saw it because he talked about it on more than one show, where it was like, and you ever see these people who are operating their iPhone and they're like a gay French king, and they're like very flourishy, you know, what would normally be gay, you know. 10 years ago, I go, what are they, gay? Like a gay man?
Sure.
Right. And so, because the audience, first of all, I don't think it's a genius joke.
No? Okay.
But also, it's not the worst thing in the world anybody ever said, but because they didn't howl at it, he's used to killing, it triggered this tirade for him.
Yes.
The audience, the more you watch comedy, the only thing you gain by watching comedy, the reason why comedy, I think, is like, you have to watch it more and more and more to get it more. It's not because it's some weird code, language that you have to learn, but you when you first start, you don't know things are conventions. So the audience doesn't know they're conventions.
Okay.
And it's those conventions that the comic can be playing on, knows he'll get a laugh doing that. And so when I started, very homogenized crowds.
Yes, okay.
So these crowds, like, I could get them laughing with sexual material. But in a lot of ways, that still hasn't changed as much. That still dick jokes, after all these years, are kind of an easy way to get a laugh.
Yes, absolutely.
And unless you're one of these really great dick joke comics, like people who are very blue and hilarious, that would be like, oh, this gets a laugh, I'll keep it in. And that's what I didn't know when I first started, why they were getting laughs.
Gotcha. Okay, so part of that journey for you then was I hate the term journey, but part of that realization for you was that just doing stuff that gets a laugh isn't necessarily enough.
It definitely is not enough. And in fact, I'll never forget this. Early on, I was like 5 years in, and I was talking to a comic last night who's like 7 years in, and the comic was telling me that they're still feel like sometimes they feel terrible on stage. And this is a comic who's felt great, and I said, you know what? That's a good sign. That means that you're restless, that you're questioning what you're doing. And I went through that whole period where I just felt uncomfortable and weird. The comics who don't are the ones you have to worry about.
Yes,
because
the people
they're
who are
not
just used
thinking
to,
about that. Why? They don't think about why. Not that you should every second go, why did that get a laugh?
Sure. So we were talking about your own development as a comic. Were you doing, when you started, the sorts of things that you're doing now? You mentioned your shtick earlier on. I got a sense of what that is. For people listening in the UK who are maybe less familiar with it, how would you describe what you meant by your shtick there?
Early shtick or...
I mean, well, what I'm getting at is, I think on stage you play this. The game you're playing is, I'm a terrible comedian. This isn't working. Hey, everyone, these are jokes. Even though they're laughing, you accuse them of not laughing. And
right.
That
started at the beginning.
Okay, that's from the off. Okay.
I the very first, I was in a duo for a couple of years, which kind of, what's the word? It's less painful. It kind of, it cushions you.
Yes.
From the pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're both could cry together.
Yeah.
But then when I went on my own, my whole thing was, the very first joke I told, my first solo show, whatever, and the joke didn't work. I said, well, that didn't go very well. So that really has never changed. It's just the degree to which I've become sophisticated about saying how things aren't going well.
Yes, and on some occasions jokes flop and you say that didn't go very well, and other times things go quite well and you go that didn't go very well.
Yeah, well, that's I think
that's kind of the richness that you've developed.
And also just the general not being able to hear the laughter.
Something that struck me about, I saw you doing the Andy Kindler alternative show,
right?
A couple of nights ago. A joke that stood out for me was you were doing impressions, and you were then just saying a thing and then saying, that's an impression of a guy who thinks the thing you've just said. Just about that format. I suppose what really tickled me about it was, particularly given in mind that idea of the Hack's Handbook, of identifying the formula of various jokes, that your jokes, you're kind of constantly trying to write jokes that don't fit into any formula.
I think
At one point you said, oh, that Ashton Kutcher, he's really good at playing Steve Apples. That's a guy who thinks that Steve Jobs' real name is Steve Apples. I laughed for about 5 minutes because that doesn't fit into any. What is that? You know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting you said it because it's how we know this in general, like from sports or whatever, that what could be say someone is an unconventional pitcher or whatever, they don't have incredible form, but they found a way to make it work. And that's what I kind of think. It's like I have a comedian friend, his name is Josh Weinstein, and I have a joke where I say, it's a DJ in the 70s, and he has the rhythm of a comedian, but no laugh. So it's like, that was Aerosmith, dude looks like a lady. Watch out, fellas. There's a dude walking around, has some kind of a dress on. Right? Hey, that was Aerosmith. Janie's got a gun. Watch out, everybody. Janie's walking around with some kind of a firearm. And my friend Josh pointed out to me that I'm the only comedian who would not change the group for the second joke. You know what I mean?
That's an incredible observation.
And that's the thing with that Steve Apples thing. Other comedians would have developed ways to say,
yes,
to Steve. I just basically have to say, that's a guy who thinks Steve Jobs is Steve Apples.
But that's the decision you've made. That's what makes you so intrinsically you. You are aware that most comedians would change the group, and you choose not to change the group. And you might present it as if, I wouldn't think to change the group. Yeah. But clearly the reality is, you know what you're doing. You're
not
playing
not with that example.
No, really?
No, I had no idea. I thought, that's how ingrained it is for me not to think of not to have that part of me. Which
because you're so unformulaic. Actually, some formulas are good, but you don't think in those terms.
That's exactly right. So in that case, it was he was making a really funny point.
Andy Kindler, he doesn't understand the rule of three.
That's exactly right. And so that's the thing with all of these deals. Is I think I was also doing a thing. Here's a guy who's looking for his wallet, maybe.
Yes, yeah.
And that's the type of thing where I used to always chap, or what is it when you like at the Spurs, or you get upset or something. I don't know. But I always
chafe.
Yeah, chafe at the idea that I don't write jokes.
Yes,
because I write jokes. But those jokes, like that joke, you would not work on paper.
Yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
right. Absolutely.
So-
But and I think that's absolutely part of its power, isn't it? Because people that I interview and in my own sort of practice, other comics I meet, a lot of people say you need to make sure that your stuff couldn't be done by someone else.
Right.
And your stuff is absolutely 100%.
No one would want to do it.
Well, no, I mean, I wouldn't want to say that, but I could see that was going to be the next sentence out your mouth.
Well, to a certain extent, I think it's true about all of our favorite. It's like, what's the difference between Mitch Hedberg and Stephen Wright? There's a similar style, but if you read them on paper, you'd laugh at both of their jokes, but you still wouldn't get the full feel
wouldn't
until
get
you hear
what
them.
they are. Yeah,
yeah. When you
absolutely.
hear Mitch Hedberg, it's like, yeah, he's in the same kind of field same kind of area as Stephen Wright. Couldn't be more different, you know.
So what does it look like when you write? Are you keeping notes? So, I mean, and we're talking about sort of 30 years plus of career here.
Right.
But when you started out then, were you keeping notes? Were you sitting, writing, typing, or were you just taking ideas on stage and improvising? What was your approach?
Well, one thing I never did, which was like, I think a lot of times people in life, they don't know what they're...
One thing I never did is be funny.
I hope all of that... I hope that's audible. That was another drive-by heckle there from Brian Posehn.
I forgot what the question was.
So how you were writing in the early days compared to how you're writing now?
Well, one thing is like, I don't think people sometimes realize what their strength is in life. And that's what's true with me, because I wanted to be a musician. And not that I still am proud of the things I was writing, but comedy came much easier for me. Mm-hmm. And because everybody in my family was funny. So if comedy comes easy, I'm not saying like it's easy, but it's ingrained, then you don't have to think. I never think what the structure of a joke is. I naturally, you know, I think most comedians are this way. They just know the joke, so they don't have to go back and analyze it. So when I first started, it was just like whenever ideas would come up. One thing I think I did that I'm very proud of is that I never threw jokes away that didn't work the first time, or I never didn't write something down that I thought was funny, which I think a lot of comics do. They go, "Oh, that's funny, but it won't fit in my act."
Okay.
So
you collect everything. You would hoard everything.
Anything I thought was funny in the moment, I wrote down, because I never get up in the morning and write, or it's always related to the world. And so the notes I collect are just ideas that I would write down, and that I've done the same way since I was started.
And what was the first joke you remember writing that you were totally happy with? That you went, that's like the first bit of gold dust joke that you wrote?
Well, you know, it's so funny because I don't think they were necessarily genius jokes, but they made me laugh. Like, just like I wrote something about how, like, it was Denny's comment card, and it said, was the outside of our building attractive and appealing? And I said, yeah, it drew me in like a fucking magnet. You know, it was like things like that. And it was always fun because I remember I never used to curse really, just because I knew I would want to be on TV or something.
Yeah.
And so I said, oh, but that joke never worked without me saying it drew me in like a fucking magnet. So there were things of that level, but I can't remember the first one that was like, oh, this is the one that, but I do remember looking at these old tapes. There's a club called Rascals Comedy Hour, and they took and we signed a release. It wasn't like and they turned them in, and they are online right now.
Yes,
so I
think I've seen them. I think you're doing a routine about making an appointment to get your ass kicked at school. Like
right,
someone like meet me after school.
And that might be that's like one of the first bits that worked that was based on a real thing.
Okay.
My fear. So that probably might be an example where, you know, I'm not going somewhere else to get my ass kicked. I'm gonna, let me make it a point. I'm getting my face punched in it too, you know, make it 250. But the joke I just heard that I forgot I did was, I said, Jewish people, we're obsessed with Hitler because we can't remember the Pharaoh. And I was looking back at I was like really proud of myself. I thought nothing I did at that point was that funny.
Yes.
And I looked back and went, oh, okay. It was,
yeah.
And that was pretty early on, so.
So what was your, the persona that you have on stage and the man that you are off stage? What are the differences between those? Because in fact, I'll ask that part of the question first.
Well, I would like to say there is no difference except that I know when I'm on stage, my job is to try to make you laugh. Whereas off stage, I probably am the same way. But I'll take breaks.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would be the only difference.
So do you keep this up? This kind of level of
I think
whatever
so.
this level of kindling. That's absolutely 24/7. I can believe it.
It is, and sometimes not for the right. Sometimes it's much to everyone's detriment. Because I have a little bit of like what I used to call, until he passed away, I used to call Robin Williams syndrome.
Yes, okay.
Where you can't stop and let anybody else get a word in, and I really have to watch that because it's not right. So
where do you think it comes from?
The wanting to be loved, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think that's what it is.
Like, it's that sense of being always on. That's what people,
Right.
there's nothing more annoying than a comic who's always on, who's like riffing in the dressing room as everyone else is like, all right, mate.
Right, and so
Pack it in.
what I would say about myself is, I may 98% of the time, that's what I honestly would joke about. Like, so it's not like I'm creating a on character.
Sure.
It's just how much I'm doing it.
Yes.
Can you
Okay.
relax for 1 second?
And what is it you think, I mean, so you said you come from a funny family.
Yes.
Did they have a similar quality of just being constantly funny all the time?
I always point to this one example of my dad, but it's such a perfect example where he's the funniest man I ever knew because, and like one time I brought home, about 10 years ago, I brought home this, like a homeopathic natural medicine thing came to the house. I'm reading it to him and he goes, and we use these supplements and we never use medical jargon to confuse you. And my dad says, they don't know any medical jargon. And so that's the way he was all day long. And that's what I grew up in, that kind of environment.
So that's interesting because I think from the outside, for someone who has a constant, like it's almost like you float around on a little cloud of jokes. Do you know what I mean? That's how you seem. When I met you today, you were like, blah, blah, blah. There's been sort of 6-7 jokes as we walked through the office.
And that is, none of that is negative to me.
Yes.
It's all degree. It's all, if I'm not feeling good, if I'm feeling like really, because my whole problem in life, it's so simple, is this feeling that whatever it is in the moment, I'm going to be abandoned or something bad will happen to me if people don't all like me. Right? That's the problem with it. It's not the joke I go for or my natural inclination. That's all the greatest, that I approach life like my dad did. I think that's the most spiritual thing I can do, and that's what I think. Lenny Bruce used to say that about. He used to be about Jews and blacks, why they're funny, because they learn to entertain their way out of oppression.
Okay, yes.
Jew, you're charming. Oh, Jew, very charming. Put down your, put down the shovel, like the slave master. It's like, oh, black man, oh, what a nice voice. Put down your hoe, and so it's like part of it we learned but the deeper part of that is the reaction to terrible things, and how comedy informs that and is kind of the answer. The ability to laugh, I really do think is the most. I can't think of anything more spiritual. Have you ever seen the Dalai Lama? Once there was the Dalai Lama, they were being interviewed, and Richard Gere was like, I'll never forget this. It was Stuttering. Remember Stuttering John?
I don't remember that.
Okay, Stuttering. I don't usually say Stuttering John. It was a Howard Stern character.
Okay, gotcha.
And he would go to news conferences and he would ask questions to ruin things. So he said to the Dalai Lama, he goes, did anybody say hello, Dolly, to you? And so the Dalai Lama was like, ah, ha, 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 ha. And Richard Gere's like, and he claims to be a Buddhist. Richard Gere.
Right.
So that's the thing, is like, the thing the Dalai Lama has is the thing that
the spirituality
we all need.
of laughing,
yes.
the zen of laughing. That's very attractive. That's a very appealing idea to think. I think I subscribe to that. That it's almost like one of the only actually genuinely pure things in the world,
and universal too.
Yes,
maybe there's an exception to the rule, like in certain one country. Exactly the opposite of what we think is funny. It's funny. But in general, once you get past the language with people, they're all kind of sharing the same view of what makes them funny,
Yes. And what's speaking, you mentioned briefly the abandonment, the fear of people leaving you or being alone or not liking you. I think that's very common it's common to everyone, not just comedians. But I suppose I experience that myself, definitely. And those are the times when I notice that I'm doing that in a party, in a social situation, if I notice I'm grandstanding, if I'm holding court, I do sometimes try and stop and go, why am I doing this? It's definitely fun, but also, and not just my fiancée, but partners throughout the years have tried to point out to me, look, it's not necessarily great for everyone else when you're doing that, because you might be really hilarious, and then afterwards you walk away and you don't really know anything about the people you were impressing, and they don't really know anything about you apart from the fact you like the sound of your own voice.
I think you're right. I think, and that's exactly right. And it's like that's what happens. That's what happens. And it's always it's like if I'm worried that Adam Sandler is going to punch me in the face from the things I say, has nothing to do with should I say it or is it right to say it. It's all the stuff that keeps people from saying things.
Yes.
That's not what everybody goes through. They don't have to. Their thing isn't I have to tell Adam Sandler he's a hack or whatever.
Yeah.
But whatever in their life that they're not doing because they're scared, it's a natural part of it. And just becoming aware of it, that really helps because you're probably the other side of it is you don't want to be always thinking, oh my God, am I going too far now?
Yep.
But for me, it's almost like, have you ever met these people? And I could be one of these people who won't fucking stop talking. I don't know if I could curse. Sorry about that.
Oh, you can. It's fine.
They won't. I mean, they have it to a degree that you can't believe it. Like 1 out of 100 people.
Yes, absolutely.
And
I
you
think
literally
every
can't.
British comedian listening to this will be thinking of the same person. there is a particular.
Ricky Gervais?
No.
No, he's just the most disliked man. I'm sorry. For general, he's very quiet. We don't like him. But then you almost feel like bad for someone like that. But it's very hard to be around them because you can never get anything in.
Yes.
And so I'm with you 100%.
So just coming back to the writing, when you write with or for, do you write for other people? Have you done that in the past?
I have done gigs like that. Like about even like 6 months ago, Ben Stiller had Night of the Museum 3, and he was promoting it like with these like overseas distributors.
Okay.
So I wrote some lines for that.
Okay.
And over the years, I have written for other people, but not for a long time.
And how does that process differ when you're writing for or with someone else?
It's just
to
an
the way you
amazing exercise, I think. It's just anything. It's like they always say, like some people say, you can make great art even with amazing constraints.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of having constraints,
yes,
can be good.
You've got to come up with 100 museum jokes.
Yes,
yeah, something like that.
But I did see your. Oh my God! There's literally a guy
dragging metal over the floor,
almost like a how-to ruin a audio recording. But I did learn from those experiences. I would like to avoid being on a staff or something like that because John Ricci.
No.
He's he's a great stand-up, and he's also an amazing writer and director. I asked him the other day because I said, so I hate writing. He goes, every writer hates writing.
Yeah.
And
That's a relief.
It's an overstatement. And he goes, anybody who tells you they don't is a liar. They love it.
Do you know, almost every guide to writing I've ever seen has included some sort of sentiment where the writer has gone, you've just got to write, you've just got to do it. I know you do. And it's almost like they're so proud of it. That makes me think probably they do hate writing because they're so proud of putting themselves through it that they have to threaten you with it. Like in the way, do you know what I mean? In the way that comics like to say to young comics, oh, it's going to be hard out there. You're going to have to drive a lot. You're going to have to travel a lot. It's going to be so lonely. You know what I mean? We take pleasure in it because we hated doing it and now someone else has to.
Yeah. And I really find that the school of really trying to discourage people from doing things is bad. As having experienced that, like my wife is a photographer, she went to an art center, which is like a place in Pasadena, a famous place, and she said when they got there, they go, now if you think you're going to get out of here and you're going to do art, don't, 1 out of a million people. So that when that kind of 1 out of a million people makes it thing, then I can't stand that because there's nothing to be gained by telling someone who's young who wants to do something, the odds are against you. That's the worst thing to tell them.
Yes.
Unless if they know 6 months later, I don't have a sense of humor, what was I thinking? That's another reason to do it.
Sure. I think, it's a similar thing. I think I remember an actor called Richard Griffiths came to her. Did you ever see With Nell and I? Did you see that?
Oh, it's
British
so funny
movie?
you say that. I've seen like half of it. And
he played Uncle Monty. He's the huge.
Yeah.
So he died a few years ago. But he came to my college when I was maybe 17 or 18, and he said, all the young actors come up to me and say, should I be an actor? And I always say the same thing. I always say, no, you shouldn't, because if I manage to put them off by telling them they shouldn't do it, then they were never going to be an actor in the first place.
Right,
Do you know what I mean?
right.
But that's almost
Yeah.
the same thing, isn't it? What you're doing is you're relishing the fact it's incredibly hard and you've done it, and you're sort of showing off to other people that, oh yes, no one can do this. I did. No, you can't.
I think it's it's like, was that Robert McKee guy who does the screenwriting?
Oh, the
thing?
story, yes, yeah.
I hate that. It's almost invariably their horrible anger or hostility about their own lives that they're. So, I mean, I guess you could argue that a certain amount of it's good, but I don't know if it's good at all. To go, you'll never. Because I know what the other thing is that people come up and say, how do I. It happened last night. Someone said to me, it's exactly what they said. It was so funny. They said, I've been doing open mics for 3 months. Where does this end? So that's the perfect example of the person where you go, if you don't learn that you just have to do it. So we always see those people who make a career out of saying that I'd like to do it one day.
Yes, yeah,
but even if you want to do it one day, you still have that fear of initially doing it.
Yes.
That's why I try not to discourage.
We started this tangent by talking about how all writers hate writing.
Right.
So it's something to put oneself through rather than something to be enjoyed.
Yes.
And I wonder if is that the same with comedy? Do you always love going on stage? Or
Yeah. That's the thing.
I wish I could have taken a picture of that look.
No, because
for the benefit of the listener, Andy he just pulled upright like a meerkat.
No, because I don't want to misrepresent. There are times I hate going on. There are times like I'm just miserable about going on stage or whatever. But when I look over the whole course of things, I really can sincerely say I love stand-up comedy. It's not like a thing to say. And so to me, it's like a salvation.
You have a grasp of rhythm, I think. What's lovely is you try to make it look like you're failing and flailing around.
Right.
Whilst actually playing us like a fiddle. Do you think that's fair?
I don't think the playing like a fiddle, but it's like I think that's something, I appreciate you saying that, but that's not how I'm feeling. I never feel like I'm like, we'll be able to, I'll never ever go, wait, I'm going to, these people, I got them in the palm of my hand.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not like that, but what I definitely am doing is, when it's not a negative thing of me just over-exaggerating how badly I'm doing, there is a constant commentary about what I'm doing.
Yes.
And that, to me, is the part of me that's like, I got from Letterman, like, whatever it is, I can't go to, the part of the joke is the joke of me doing the joke.
That is exactly what I wanted to hear. Yeah,
almost
absolutely.
always. Like, yeah, I do a joke where I go, where I say, because of I say there's a lot of anti-Islamic sentiment in the world. As a Jewish person, I want to say thanks for the breather, right? And I go, but all my Islamic projects are on hold. So my jihad energy drink, not gonna fly. And I started to do a series of my Ramadan noodles, not going to happen. And what I say is, this is how I have to entertain myself while I'm doing a joke I've done before. So that's the rhythm of it. So.
Okay, so what, you change the rhythm, or you change the pitch, or you're doing a thing within the joke to make you laugh, to keep yourself engaged in the...
And also because it may be true that Ramadan noodles is a hacky, you know what I mean? It's like such a hacky kind of a joke to me in a way, even though, although the other thing I end with was an Islamic version of the Three Stooges with Mohammed, Larry, and a second Mohammed.
Yeah.
I stand by the writing right there.
Yeah.
You know, but the Ramadan noodles is like almost I'm making fun of that kind of a joke in a way.
Yes. Do you read reviews ever? Have you ever read reviews? Do you engage with that? You do?
I try. That's another one of my addictions, is the Twitter addiction. And it's like, what has this robot said about me? I don't read, like my wife. I tell her, do not read these comments on YouTube. I don't read anything like...
Yeah, okay.
Because I'm not saying I never do, but in general, but anybody who's reviewing or anybody who has an opinion or anybody, I do. I check it out.
And do you ever find yourself agreeing with a review? Or is it just like, if it agrees with your view of yourself on that night, you go, okay, fine. And if it disagrees with you, how do you feel about them? Do you think, oh, that's that person's opinion, that's valid? Or do you get angry with them?
I think that even though my feelings would get hurt, if someone did have something valid about the show, I would be probably admit to it. But so much of reviewing is like I got very a big like battle with the AV Club. You know the AV Club.
Oh yeah.
Because they would be reviewing these podcasts. So like one of my heroes is James Adomian. I think he's the funniest guy in the world. I don't know if you know him.
James
Adomian. He does impressions.
Never heard of it.
He's just the greatest.
This is so exciting being here because I feel like I'm going over the list of 100 names of people I've never encountered before.
Oh yeah, he's like does incredible. He does impressions of me, Mark Maron, but like to a level that's and then just does like Jesse Ventura and all of these things, and he's so brilliant. So they have this thing called Podmaster where they review podcasts, and this guy was like saying he's criticizing. Oh, and James Adomian did another character that we don't like, or some kind of offhand thing. Where, and my point with what I got so mad was like these podcasts and these things you go on, they're not. You're supposed to be working. We're supposed to be working on new material.
Yes.
So when you slam a comic, first of all, I didn't agree with anything the person said, but just the idea that you're going to slam people for taking chances, that's not a valid criticism.
Yes, absolutely.
And that kind of stuff I can't.
I think that's the thing that most infuriates comics is the idea that like it's only the perpetual risk of failure that keeps it alive and lets you discover new things. Yeah. And for someone to come along and go, well, that failed. Oh, sorry, would you rather no one took any risks?
Yeah, and but those are the same people who are looking for something unique. I'm looking for something unique out here in comedy.
Absolutely,
And you're not going to get unique unless you're willing to. And that's just a matter of a lot of the people don't, when they're writing as a critic just about bad, good, I hated it, I didn't like it, they missed some things. So I can't think of anything where someone really ripped me apart that I liked.
And if you had to review yourself, if you had to review your, like a 20-minute set somewhere, what would be... how would you describe Andy Kindler?
Well, I think in a certain way, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I do think it is almost impossible to get a view of yourself, an accurate view of yourself, because you're the person doing it.
But I want your biased view of yourself.
My biased view of myself is
what things do you see? Like if you were to watch yourself back, you'd go, I just can't ever seem to X, Y, Z.
I never can seem to let go of how the audience is doing.
Yes.
So I think,
but that's most of your act, isn't it? Or it permeates your act.
It permeates. So I just feel like it's the strength, and sometimes if I was to see it, I could see myself in the audience getting annoyed.
Okay.
Okay. So it's like, you made 45 comments. So it's just a matter of degree.
I see.
But I could see myself though in what I would normally see for myself that I would criticize is almost always I was not feeling good that night. I did not feel a connection to the crowd. Mm-hmm. And because there was no connection to the crowd, and I could blame myself for that. Sometimes I blame myself. Sometimes it's just not meant to be. I could see that's not a good show because I'm not even having fun at it being a bad show. But I don't know that I would ever critique my operating philosophy. Because I'm the best. I'm the king, baby. I think I have the right approach to how I do the comedy. I just think my criticism of myself would be degree sometimes. Or how angry I am sometimes. I don't know.
Are you happy?
I'm very blessed with not having depression. So I never get what so many people in the world get, like, where blackness and you can't do anything about it. But I do have that nagging thing that we were talking about of someone's going to get me or I will be rejected on some fundamental level. And that is something that causes a lot of pain. And it almost always gets relieved by me just remembering it. I get off my own back if I can remember them on my own back, That's
really good advice. Yeah, just a little reminder. I've often thought sometimes I suffer a lot from anxiety. Just a little sign on the back of the door. Or if you could employ someone to just move the sign every day so that you didn't get used to it. So that you go, it's fine. Oh, it's actually fine, isn't it?
I think you're right. And I think what you're saying is, when you say you suffer from anxiety, I think it's because I don't know if you've ever had that. I used to have panic attacks, but they went away.
I would want to.
Yeah. So sometimes there is absolutely a chemical component, so it's not the same for everybody. But that general anxiety, I think, is the same in everybody, or some similar form of it with everybody. it gets like well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe that's not true.
No, go
could
on.
be. Well, just like you feel something terrible is going to happen. Is that how you feel when you're anxious?
I feel when I get right down to the bottom of it, I feel like it's that I am going to be left alone somehow. That's my thing.
It's the
Absolutely.
same thing.
No, that's not a conscious thought. I'm just edgy, and if you would, I'd need to stop myself and go, why are you edgy? What's the worst thing that can happen now? Okay, and if that happened, what would that mean?
Yes.
And if that were true, what would that mean? It always boils down to I'd be alone.
Yes, and the reason why I'm sure sometimes even that can't, and when that can't help, then you just have to breathe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that means it's getting in there. So, because sometimes you go, I know this is why, and you still can't stop it. But there's letters I have as a 7 I used to go to summer camp when I was like 7. It's just like letters. Don't forget to pick me up at the station. Don't forget to pick me up at the station. And there's a lot of levels to that. My parents were not there in a way sometimes, like for their own emotional or psychological things. And so I sensed that as a kid. And then you start to feel like if you're not totally always engaging them and making sure everything's okay,
Yes.
you could die.
Yes.
And so if I'm 4 years old thinking they're not going to pick me up at the bus stop, that's a fundamental thing. And that's it's not that it has to last your whole life. I think it lasts your whole life, and the spiritual thing is how you deal with that. But it seems like it's the same thing but maybe not for every person, but it seems like it's a similar type of thing.
I think the moments that are most frustrating to me are when I feel like I've been on an upward swing for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
And I feel like, hey, I've nailed this. God, I can't believe I ever used to get depressed or anxious. And then a couple of days after that, something tiny will happen again and it'll set it off. And you go, for Christ's sake, I'm back here again.
Yeah. And did you see Daniel Gould's keynote address?
No, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to read it online.
But the whole thing that he was saying was like how he agonized over these career things, and so, and that telling people you're doing, instead of thinking about what will you make it, you realize you're doing it right now. And
Yes.
so I think what happens in those 2 week things, unconsciously, we still are buying into things are going well, and then I'm going to be named the King of England, and then it's like even though you intellectually no, that's not what I'm doing it for. There's still a little bit that you buy into the upward sweep of things.
Yes, I'm happy not because I'm calm and peaceful, but I'm happy because I'm believing that it's all working out.
And it is working out.
But that
on
inevitably
level.
means you're going to crash because you won't always feel like that.
That's exactly
That's
right.
very wise. That's very wise. Andy.
Well, I think the difference between healthy people and people who aren't sometimes is not knowing what's going on. Like if you really don't know and you say, like what Danny Gould said, in show business, you'll pull a guy's eye out and use his socket as a toe hold to get something off a high shelf. So if you're not aware of that, that's when it gets terrible. Can be. I don't know. I'm no psychoanalyst.
I've got two more questions.
Sure.
The first is something you must have heard variations on before. But,
I'm a Jew.
What, are you actually a Jew?
It is true.
What advice would you give to newer comics listening to this? And it's very difficult because obviously we don't like to give advice necessarily.
Right.
Do you know? That's
yeah.
You don't want to steer someone into being something that...
Like just do jokes about cereal. Stay away from politics. All the things that are terrible. I would think, and this is true about me in my 20s, I wish I had been, I know it sounds like new agey, but I wish I had been nicer to myself all through my whole life. Like when I was trying to be a musician, I look back at those things and go, yeah, but you didn't go into showcase clubs. You did top 40. You were an idiot. Mm-hmm. Which is, objectively, you could say I wasn't going to get where I was if I didn't get into, showcase clubs. Mm-hmm. But that's not allowing that you were in your 20s and you felt terrible,
Yes,
So not allowing to realize that everyone goes through that, and that's a natural thing. And to try to be nicer to yourself, and also to realize, which is basic, I think if your heart's in the right place and you've been doing it for a long time, you have to just do it. There's no other shortcut to doing it than doing it. And the process of learning the technique, which is not like a thing you study. It's just over and over and over again. You'll work out all of those problems. So any problem, anything when you're new where you go, what's my persona? Then you don't want to ask that question. You know, where am I? Who am me? Who am I going to be on stage? Forget it. All those things will work themselves out, and you can't force them or draw them up ahead of time. At least I can't.
That's really good advice.
Oh,
that's really good advice. It is, because I think, absolutely, I know I have spent, and I'm sure a lot of my contemporaries have spent a lot of time going, who am I? What is it? And particularly me. I mean, the whole reason we're doing this is I have this stupid, over-analytical approach to everything. But that, like, to not analyse and to not try and predict what it is and to not try and contrive what it is.
Right.
To actually just be you. It's the hardest thing. It's this ridiculous... That's the zen of comedy, isn't it? It's just go on stage and be as you are when you're just being funny with your friends.
Well, but I would say that, you know, not to blow smoke up your... There's a line from Dr. Katz that actually David Mamet, when he said, like, are you just blowing smoke up my ass? And I think David Mamet says, what do you mean just? But I don't think you're over analytical. I think that your desire to find out what's going on is for the right reasons. You know, it's not like you want to at the end of the day say, I think we've worked it out today.
Yeah. Excellent. Comedy's over.
Following equations. And next week we'll learn also the right clothes.
Well, I worry I'm going to be like one of these kind of CERN kind of, like the super collider guys who actually, we want to understand the universe. Oh, we've destroyed everything.
Yeah, right.
Accidentally. It turned out we did work out the formula for comedy, and now no one can do it anymore because everyone knows it.
Well, or it would be like the James Lipton thing.
Yeah.
You know, the guy does the acting.
Yes.
Where it's like, at some point, it's like, oh, so pretentious.
Yeah.
You're not any of those things.
Oh, thank you. And the final question then is, what would you have on your comedy gravestone?
My comedy gravestone would be... I don't know. I keep... I'll go with... David Letterman once said, whenever he says a mean joke, and people get uncomfortable, he goes... Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was a roast. So, that's all I have on my gravestone. I'm sorry. I thought this was a roast.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much.
So that was Andy. Thank you so much to Andy for coming on. Thanks for Bruce at Omnipop, who looks after him, and some other brilliant comics as well, who I'm hoping to get on the podcast. I know he looks after Jimmy Pardo. He looks after Doug Benson. I mean, brilliant podcasters in their own right. And the wonderful Maria Bamford, who, if you don't know about Maria, you should absolutely start YouTubing the hell out of her. She is a complete force of nature when it comes to ideas of expression, of a completely different comic vocabulary to what you'll be used to. She's been to the UK a few times in the past. I've never seen her live, but her last couple of albums have absolutely knocked my socks off. So have a look for them. And you can buy Andy's, I think Andy's special that he recorded maybe 10 years ago. It's called I Wish I Was Bitter. I've got a copy of it and it's absolutely fantastic. So have a look for that as well. And remember, nathansmart.com/akhh.pdf. You can have a look at the Hacks Handbook. It's very, very funny reading indeed. Thank you to Nathan for his work, Nathan Wood for his work co-producing this show. Thanks to Olivia Phipps for her work, James Hingley for the new website, which you must check out at www.comedianscomedian.com. Regular service will be resumed next week. We've got a couple more pre-records that I've got to put out to you. Very, very good shows with Charlie Baker and Justin Morehouse that I'm really keen for you to hear before you go up to Edinburgh, or on the way. Why not listen to them on the way up to Edinburgh, or just when you arrive, so that you can make an informed decision to definitely go and see the hell out of their shows. Lots more fun stuff to come. My own show is called An Hour. That's on at Canonsgate at 4:55 every day. That's for free on PBH's Free Fringe, so come along to that. I'll see you there. Thanks a lot.